All right, everyone. Thank you for joining our kickoff for the May Preservation Month and for the Milwaukee Soldiers Home tour season. We are here today with Laura and Terry, two of our tour guides who know many things and are very passionate about the Soldiers Home. For those of you who don't know me, I am Emma Rudd. I am the Executive Director of the Milwaukee Preservation Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization that is a community voice for historic preservation advocacy throughout the Milwaukee area. We offer programs like this and others to educate residents, property owners, and decision makers about the many benefits of preserving and reusing our older and historic buildings and connect them with the resources to help make preservation possible. So for this project, we actually partnered with the National Trust for Historic Preservation approximately a decade ago to find a solution for some of the buildings that, as you know, on the Soldiers' Home grounds had been vacant for decades. That effort, known as Save the Soldiers' Home, has seen incredible success. You've hopefully seen it in the news lately. And I'm very excited that Laura and Terry are here to share some of the history of the Soldiers' Home with you today. And then I will, towards the end, give you an update kind of on the next steps and where things are headed. So it was actually a very complex path that eventually led to the issuing of a request for proposal for the rehabilitation of Old Main and the other buildings within the district, which was awarded to a Madison developer known as the Alexander Company. And they put together a diverse team that really made the success possible. We're very proud of our advocacy efforts. We combined with many partners, and that resulted in the reopening of Old Main and 5 other buildings on the historic campus in 2021. Over 101 units of permanent supportive housing for veterans and their families at risk of homelessness became available. 150-year-old building that once had a collapsed roof and was called Beyond Repair has been saved and became a national example and an incredible testimony to the win-win power of preservation to make a real difference in people's lives today. We're currently continuing the work to bring the same success to the remaining buildings that are vacant and endangered on the campus, the chapel, the theater, and the governor's mansion. And we'll talk more about all that a little bit later. But first, let's start with the all-important question, what is the Milwaukee Soldiers Home? And here today to tell you a little bit more about that are Terry and Laura. Now, I do want to make a quick disclaimer. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please add them to the chat box. We will be doing a short Q&A towards the end as time permits. And as always, please stay on mute and please, feel free to turn your camera on if you want. You don't have to. And I will now hand it over to Laura and Terry to tell you more about the Soldiers' Home.
The Soldiers' Home is a vital link to our local, state, and national history, and it was created for one purpose, which continues to this day, to serve veterans. There's a special reason why Milwaukee was chosen as a location for one of the 3 original Soldiers' Homes. In 1862, during the Civil War, a group of women in Milwaukee formed the West Side Soldiers Aid Society. Led by Lydia Eli Hewitt, Fanny Burling Buttrick, Martha Mitchell, and Hannah Vetter, and other prominent Milwaukee women, they worked to provide care and transitional housing to returning Civil War soldiers. They focused on caring for discharged soldiers and providing meals, medical care, and temporary housing in rented buildings located in downtown Milwaukee. In early 1864, the Wisconsin Soldiers' Home Association was formed by a coalition of women's charitable organizations led by those same members of the West Side Soldiers Aid Society. Without any formal system in place to care for an unprecedented number of sick, disabled, and displaced soldiers, the association began planning for a permanent facility that would provide long-term solutions for Wisconsin veterans. Their vision was to create a home where Wisconsin veterans could receive medical treatment, housing, and vocational training. In 1865, the association organized a fundraising event called the Soldiers' Home Fair. It was held in a building specifically built for this purpose in downtown Milwaukee, near Broadway and Huron. The fair was extremely successful, raising more than $100,000 which would amount to $1.8 million today. While the exterior of the fair building was simple, the interior decorations were very ornate. After the fair, the building was dismantled and materials sold, adding to the fair's profits. In the meantime, in March 1865, just a month before he was assassinated, President Lincoln signed legislation to create a national system of homes for disabled volunteer soldiers. This is an important distinction since these soldiers were volunteers and not part of the regular Army or Navy. And as such, they were ineligible for care at existing federal facilities for veterans. In 1866, when the federal government began selecting sites for the soldiers' homes, local businessmen and politicians lobbied to construct a branch here in Milwaukee. The money available as a result of the West Side Soldiers Aid Society's fundraising swayed the decision in favor of Milwaukee. The lady managers were eventually persuaded to turn their assets over to the federal government, and land was purchased for the National Soldiers' Home near the city of Wauwatosa. In May of 1867, 60 soldiers moved from the West Side Soldiers Aid Society's temporary operations in downtown Milwaukee to existing farm buildings at the new location of the Northwestern branch of the National Home for Disabled Volunteer Soldiers. This lithograph is dated 1875, 8 years after the arrival of those first soldiers. Old Main at Top Center was completed and occupied in 1869. The main entrance to the property was located on Elizabeth Street, and in 1877, that street was officially renamed National Avenue due to the amount of traffic to and from the National Home. Over the years, some aspects of the Soldiers' Home have changed. For example, at one time, the district contained farmland, greenhouses, and 4 lakes. Despite these changes, one of the many things that make the Milwaukee Soldiers' Home unique is that it is the only Soldiers' Home to still include most of its original buildings and village-like feel. Note in this lithograph, there are no corner towers on Old Main. They were added in 1876 and can be seen in later slides. The creators and designers believed the landscape would play a critical role in creating a recuperative environment for soldiers. It was specially designed with winding paths, groves of trees, and ponds to provide a place of peace. The home also served as one of Milwaukee's first major public parks. Milwaukee residents would make the trip out to the soldiers' homes to enjoy the serenity it offered. Of course, visiting with the home residents was an important way for area residents to thank those who had served during the Civil War. Picnics and concerts were often held on the home grounds. The home was considered the countryside. The home was designated to be highly visible, reminding citizens of the federal government's support of these volunteer soldiers and helping to forge a stronger link between the citizens and the federal government. That fountain was built in 1878. Many veterans today believe the grounds continue to have a unique healing quality.
Part of the district's expansive landscape is Wood National Cemetery, which makes up the western boundary of the Soldiers' Home. It was originally known as the Soldiers' Home Cemetery and opened in 1871. If you use I-94, you can see Wood National Cemetery on both sides of the freeway, just west of American Family Field. Today, the cemetery holds over 37,000 graves and is visible from almost every building on the Soldiers' Home grounds. There are 5 Medal of Honor recipients, all Civil War. It serves as a final resting place for veterans from every conflict except the American Revolution. This is an aerial view of the historic district on the Milwaukee VA campus. Currently, many of these buildings are being used by the Milwaukee VA for offices and to provide veteran services. The historic district currently covers about 90 acres. At its founding, the home occupied 375 acres. Over the last several decades, many of the district's historic buildings became vacant and started deteriorating. It is our ultimate goal to see these buildings rehabbed and returned to the service of veterans. We'll talk about our work to advocate for the restoration of these buildings, but first I'd like to take a step back and tell you more about our history of the Soldiers' Home. Let's start off by taking a look at one of our district's most iconic buildings, Old Main. Old Main is the centerpiece of the Soldiers' Home district. Its majestic towers are visible for miles. It is Old Main's towers that you see from I-94 and American Family Field. Old Main was strategically positioned on the highest point in the district so the building would overlook the rest of the Soldiers' Home and take advantage of the breezes at that higher elevation. Attractive architecture and grounds were intended to instill pride in the veterans staying here. The building, completed in 1869, was designed by famed Milwaukee architect Edward Townsend Mix, who also designed many of the most prominent buildings in Milwaukee. Old Main was a domiciliary for patient living and care and was meant to hold all the functions of the Soldiers' Home, including administrative offices. The building included the dispensary, matron's room, library, chapel, the surgeon's room, and a sitting room for residents. There was also a dining room in the rear of the building and a bathing room and a laundry room in the basement. The sleeping areas on the second, third, and fourth floors of the building were dorm-style rooms with common gathering spaces. Old Main originally had a 500-bed capacity, but the building quickly became overcrowded. In the late 1800s, it served as the living quarters for nearly 1,000 veterans. This is the main dining room, which could hold up to 1,000 residents per meal. Many of Old Main's original details were preserved during restoration, such as the graceful support columns and the arched windows in this photo. Also intact are many of the original doors, door hardware, old heating grill work. Old Main housed veterans until 1989, when residents were moved to the newly remodeled hospital annex. As of March 2021, it once again houses veterans. The Soldiers' Home was meant to bring veterans together as a community, but also bring the community to our veterans. In many ways, Ward Memorial Theater served this purpose. Ward Memorial Hall was constructed in 1881 and named for Horatio Ward. He was an American banker and patriot who created an endowment fund to construct memorial halls for the soldiers' homes. The intent was to provide the home's members with cultural activities such as concerts, theatrical performances, and lectures, and allow them to socialize, relax, and enjoy recreation time with one another. It was originally a multi-purpose building with a flat-floored hall serving as a theater, amusement hall, restaurant, home store, post office, and place of worship. At one point, it even housed veterans when membership exceeded space in the barracks. The theater was remodeled in 1898, but the original seats shown here were kept and are still in the balcony that was added during the remodel. Henry Cook designed Ward Memorial Hall, arguably his most celebrated creation in the district. This 2.5-story building is constructed of Cream City brick. The hall is designed in New Renaissance style, which is characterized by round arches and symmetrical windows. Over the years, Ward Memorial Theater hosted many appearances by lecturers, vaudeville troupes, and musicians, including Will Rogers, Bob Hope, and Liberace. This striking building is located immediately south of the former railroad line. In fact, Ward Memorial Hall had a passenger waiting room that serviced railroad passengers. The ticket window can still be seen on the theater's north side. The train tracks were removed in 2007, and the area is now part of the Hank Aaron State Trail. During an 1898 renovation, the hall was rebuilt to its present configuration with balconies, a sloped floor, new seats, and an orchestra pit, and was used solely as a theater. In the late 1920s and early 1930s, additional enhancements were made to allow for the showing of motion pictures. Acoustical tiles were added to the first floor walls, and pastoral scenes were painted on them, including images of what we believe are Wisconsin dells. Performances at the hall were often donated by the performers or were paid for by the home's post fund, allowing soldiers to always be admitted free. One of the spectacular features of Ward Memorial Hall was the large stained glass portrait of Ulysses S. Grant on horseback, a gift from the people of St. Louis and the Grand Army of the Republic following the Army's 1887 national encampment. It was installed in 1887 on the east side of the theater, 6 years after the building was completed. It was recently removed pending plans for restoration of the building and is currently in safe storage.
Looking at how the window opening is set to one side and not symmetrical on the building's exterior, you can see how the building was altered in order to insert the prized window. The window was always backlit at night. The Ward Theater is currently vacant, but MPA is working on finding new uses for it as we speak. More of that to come in just a few minutes. The second of the three buildings being studied for potential adaptive reuse is the Soldiers' Home Chapel. Part of the recuperation offered by the grounds was spiritual health. The chapel aided veterans in spiritual healing. Designed by famed Milwaukee architect Henry Cook, the wood frame building displays some Queen Anne style architectural features, which tend to be asymmetrical shapes with differing wall textures, such as patterned wood shingles shaped into varying designs, as you see here. It was built in the shape of a cross. Flowers for the altar came from the greenhouses grown on the Soldiers' Home grounds. In 1893, the people of Milwaukee donated the chapel's bell. On the chapel's bell tower, you'll see siding of alternating patterns of clapboard and shingles. The chapel hosts elaborate stained glass windows that overlook verandas on the sides of the chapel, offering a peaceful atmosphere for veterans who used the facility. The Soldiers' Home Chapel is a multi-denominational church built in 1889. Catholic and Protestant chaplains were employed by the government to hold services and visit hospitalized veterans. The chaplains lived in the Soldiers' Home district in two separate residences just behind the chapel. And here's what the chapel looks like today in a state of disrepair. A critical part of the Soldiers' Home was caring for ill or injured veterans. This building, the old hospital, was built in 1879 and was the first building specifically designated as a hospital on the grounds. This is the center wing main entry. There are 4 more wings, one of which can be seen off to the right in this photo. Like many other buildings in the district, this building was also designed by Henry Cook. Over the years, 2 additional wings were built on the west side of the building. Large porches were added so patients with tuberculosis could enjoy fresh air. Here's another historic photo of the interior. The Soldiers' Home District was about more than just hospital care. As we mentioned before, the district was designed with a village-like feel. Veterans could check out books at Wadsworth Library, which now serves as a VA training center. Or they could go bowling at the recreation building. The bowling alley still exists today, but is not in the use, and there are offices upstairs. There were billiard tables on the main floor and a dance/bingo/social hall on the 3rd floor. or veterans could take a walk and pick up their mail from the administration building. This administration recreation cluster of buildings were designed to maintain a visual focus of Old Main. The cluster of buildings include Ward Theater, Wadsworth Library, the Recreation Building, and the Headquarters or Administration Building. This building arrangement maintained the picturesque landscape setting to the east, while also providing close proximity to the hospitals and barracks for the veterans. The inset photo is part of the old post office. Several of the post office boxes had been damaged, but have been painstakingly restored. The administration or headquarters building was built in 1896 as part of the building boom, along with other core buildings in the institutional area. The headquarters exterior is cream city brick, making its appearance consistent with its neighboring buildings. The headquarters contained the offices of the governor, treasurer, quartermaster, adjutant, clerical staff, commissary officer, chief guard, and fire marshal. The upper story of this building contained reading and sleeping quarters for clerks who were civilian employees. The basement contained the print shop. It served as the VA Center main office until 1942, after which it housed the domiciliary staff office and the campus post office. The interior of some of the rooms have walls and nails covered in embossed metal, and some of the original brass, glass, and hardware have been retained. Since 1942, it was used for many years as offices for various VA service organizations. Now totally renovated as of 2021, there are 14 single occupancy rooms for veterans at risk of becoming homeless. Note that the photo at the bottom of the slide shows the room, the old quartermaster office in its restored state. The before condition was steam damage, holes in the floor kind of condition. Finally, I'll mention the Governor's Mansion. Built in 1868, it's the oldest building remaining on campus. The residence was built for the Soldiers' Home Director, whose position was then referred to as governor. It began in a smaller building with a mansard roof similar to the roof of Old Main. By 1916, the house was remodeled with the addition of the third floor and the replacement of the mansard roof with a hexagonal tent tower. The mansion's design is attributed to Edward Townsend Mix, the same architect who designed Old Main. The original form of the building almost identically mirrors the architect's own home in Milwaukee, formerly located on Waverly Place, which has since been demolished. Today, the Governor's Mansion is vacant and in need of renovation. It's one of the 3 buildings, along with the chapel and theater, that Milwaukee Preservation Alliance is working with the VA to identify qualified and interested developers to pursue a reuse.
With all of the successes in the district, there were some losses. After the power plant's construction in 1895, all of the Soldiers' Home buildings were heated, lighted, and furnished with hot water from this centrally located power plant. The original power plant was replaced by a new plant in 1964 and was recently deconstructed, with as many bricks as possible being salvaged for use elsewhere on campus and in the community. Its site is now a parking lot. But there's a lot more good news to report, which brings us back to the restoration story. This is where we started in 2010. Here's the hole in the roof that kicked off the preservation effort. And that hole looks small here, but it was about 30 feet across. How did we get from here to the restored buildings we have today? Unfortunately, the VA had moved out of many of these buildings and they were unable to maintain buildings they weren't using. These vacant places started to suffer from deferred maintenance. This photo is the massive kitchen in the basement of Old Main pre-restoration. These are some photos of one of the 3 duplexes and the former Catholic chaplain's quarters that were ultimately restored as part of the project. The true story here is the value of layers of public-private partnerships. This project brought together multiple government agencies at all levels, private businesses, nonprofits, community groups, veterans, philanthropic foundations, and thousands of individual visionaries and contributors working together. Milwaukee Preservation Alliance successfully nominated the campus to the National Trust for Historic Preservation's 11 Most Endangered list, eventually leading to the coveted designation of National Historic Landmark in 2011. To generate interest and spread the word, MPA raised money for signage along I-94 and the Hank Aaron State Trail, created a free walking tour smartphone app, and put together a number of educational resources on the SaveTheSoldiersHome.com website. Here's a look at the restoration in Old Maine's dining room. Note the previously mentioned original graceful support columns and the arched windows. The results are pretty spectacular. Old Main now has 71 bedroom and 10 two-bedroom units, large community spaces, a business center, fitness areas, history room, workforce training, and offices for management and counseling. 11 units in a separate and secure wing are designated for women. The administration building provides 14 single-room units with a common kitchen, dining, community, and living rooms. What many said was impossible is now complete, and veterans once again call it home. And here you can see the location of each of the restored properties. And some before and after shots of the exterior. Note the new slate shingles. These are not some newfangled composite replacement shingle. These are slate shingles, just like the originals and from the same quarry as the originals. This is the interior of one of the tower rooms pre-restoration. And the interior of one of the tower rooms after renovation. This project has won just about every preservation and real estate award possible in the last several years, including the most prestigious preservation awards available from Wisconsin Historical Society and the National Trust for Historic Preservation.
All right, so I'll turn my camera back on. So as it was previously mentioned, the work is not done. 3 key historic buildings are in pretty rough shape. The Ward Memorial Theater, the Governor's Mansion, and the chapel are currently unused. But we are very pleased to announce that the approval was given in February for the work to begin, hopefully spring of 2025. And the company, Alexander Company, that worked on Old Main will also be working on these 3 beautiful buildings. So you're probably asking, what are the uses going to be for these buildings? So the intent was always to return them to their original service for the veterans. So the Ward Memorial Theater will host community theater events, musical groups, and offer a space for a venue as conferences and lectures for VA Medical Center staff and veterans. The Soldiers Home Chapel will become a non-denominational worship space and a conference space for training and mental health sessions. And then the governor's residence will hold offices for supportive services providers, as well as technological training center to provide computer literacy training. The Alexander Company, as I mentioned, is overseeing the project. And again, these are the same folks who did the restoration to Old Main. So we're very excited to see what they have in store. So of course, you can always find us on socials. We do have a Save the Soldiers Home Facebook page. If you're still using X, or formerly known as Twitter, There is a Save the Soldiers Home account, and we are on Instagram. And then if you're like me and you just want to go to the source material, we do have a website known as savethesoldiershome.com. And as always, you can always go to the Milwaukee Preservation Alliance.org website, and there is a Save the Soldiers Home tab as well. So yeah, if you want to learn more, here are your links, and we'll also follow up with this presentation. We'll give a copy of the webinar and then some of the links that we've mentioned. And then you're probably asking yourself, okay, these buildings were really cool. I would really like to get on the grounds. Well, do we have an opportunity for you? So as mentioned before, we do have a free walking tour that you can at any time, carry your phone in your pocket. It does have a voiceover recording that will essentially walk you through the grounds, tell you about each of the buildings, a little bit about their history and their architecture. But if you're interested in a little bit more personal of a tour, as mentioned, Laura and Terry are two of our wonderful tour guides, but we do have a fantastic group of tour guides that offer free guided walking tours of the grounds and do get you inside of Old Main to see the restoration firsthand and enjoy the great history exhibit that is currently in the building's basement. For that, you can visit our website for the tour schedules and registration information. And as I mentioned, this is our kickoff. So the tour schedule is live for the summer months. So if you're interested in getting on the Soldiers Home grounds, please visit MilwaukeePreservationAlliance.org/Soldiers Home. And that is where you will find some tour information. And of course, if you're interested in the work that we are doing here at Milwaukee Preservation Alliance, please stay in touch with us. We do more than just the Soldiers Home. We are throughout the community. You've probably seen us on some of the Save the Domes work. We also just recently acquired a historic tavern in the 3rd Ward. That's an exciting project. But again, you can visit us online at MilwaukeePreservationAlliance.org. Again, we're on all socials. And if you really want to get involved, we encourage you to become a member or donate, sponsor, sign up for our mailing list. And your contributions as a member or donations, sponsorships really keep us going and allow us to host events like this webinar and really advocate for the community at large. So now what I want to do is I want to thank you all for attending and open it up for a little bit of Q&A. So I do see we have some chat. I don't know if we have. Yes. So if you have any questions, I see we have one in here already, but please feel free to keep putting your questions in the chat and we will answer them as best we can. Oh, so this is a good one for the tour guides. And you guys are probably gonna have to unmute yourselves. Are there any suggested walking routes for the grounds available if one just wants to walk around on one's own?
Then we would suggest you download the tour app and it will tell you exactly what turns to make, what lane to go up, and how to see every one of those great little buildings.
Yeah, so you can see on here, we do have that walking tour app, and it does actually start you. There's a little map on it, and it will kind of start you at like, here's step 1, we'll start here. So highly recommend that. All right, are there any other questions? All right, well, not seeing any, I guess we will go ahead and wrap up for the day. And I just again want to say thank you all for attending. This webinar was recorded and will be online. We do also have, if you want to learn more, there's a fantastic book that was written by Patricia Lynch that we do have available for $20. It's also for sale on our website. So a lot of the photos you saw today were from this book. So, and all proceeds do go to the Milwaukee Preservation Alliance. So thank you again for attending, and we will follow up with an email link probably Monday if you want to watch this again or share it with your friends and family. And we hope to see you on a tour. All right. Thank you, everyone.